If you have some life savings and you're considering starting a business, at some point in that process you'll be faced with a choice. Invest in a high risk, high reward business, or invest in one that is low risk, low reward. Now when I say high risk, high reward, don't think about your uncle's stupid idea that he's been trying to get off the ground for the past 10 years.
I had an idea like that once, a long time ago. It was a jump to conclusions, Matt. You see, it would be this mat that you would put on the floor and would have different conclusions written on it that you could jump to.
I'm talking about genuine opportunities that require a high investment but could actually pay off big time. Obviously everyone prefers a high reward business. The scary part is on the other side of the coin though. Nobody likes high risk. Even people who are already wealthy don't like high risk. When you're about to invest your life savings, that high risk part becomes especially scary. On the other hand, the problem with a low risk, low reward business is that low reward part. You still have to put in the work, the money, the time, the resources, yet the returns won't be that great and you'll have to wait a while to recoup your investment. Oftentimes you can even find financial instruments that will give you a similar return on your investment, but without having to do any actual work, so why bother anyway? For this reason, most people will gravitate towards the high reward business and think they can deal with the risk. Most people will also lose their life savings doing that, and most people will also become too scared or too jaded to try again. So why not combine them and get a low risk, high reward business, right? Realistically, that's not gonna happen, so let's not waste our time chasing rainbows. The more down-to-earth option is to try and reduce the risk. Let's call it high reward, medium risk. In order to reduce risk, you must understand it. Risk is just exposure to danger that comes from uncertainty. Uncertainty comes from lack of information. This means that you can reduce risk with information, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. First of all, you need to accept that risk is natural and it acts as a filter. If there was no risk, everyone could do it, and when everyone can do it, it becomes worthless. The trick is not to find something that is profitable but has zero risk, because that doesn't exist. The trick is to reduce the risk for yourself while the risk for everyone else is high. Let me explain. Let's say you want to buy shares in a certain company, but you're unsure about its future. Some report comes out which reveals that the company is in a much better position than anyone thought. This is the moment you've been waiting for. This new information has reduced your risk, so now it's time to jump in, right? Wrong. That information reduced the risk for you, but it also reduced it for everyone else. This will be reflected in the price of the share almost immediately. Unless you have some AI trading system that is able to interpret news and make trades in a millisecond, that new information is virtually useless to you. If the risk reduction works for everyone, the market will adapt to it quickly and it will be reflected in the price. There will be no money to be made there unless you're one of the first. I use the example above because it's easier to illustrate it in the stock market, but the principle also applies when starting a business. It just takes a while longer to manifest. The part that many people don't understand is that when you're looking for high gains, not all information is created equal. Information can indeed reduce risk, but if it's public, it reduces risk for everyone, and it also reduces gains proportionally. In a world where everyone has perfect information about everything, there would be no risk, but there will also be no gains. So the trick is to get information that only you or a handful of people know, because only that type of information gives you an advantage. In the stock market, that might be called insider trading, but in the private sector, there's no law that stops you from acting on information that only you discovered. So how do you get information that only you can possess? Obviously you can't outsource this part, and you can't rely on public information too much unless it's obscure enough that it doesn't create competition. This means that you have to get your hands dirty and do some market research of your own. It all starts with the business idea. That idea is your own, and nobody can take that from you. The problem is that you're not sure if the idea is good or bad. This is where the market research comes into play. What you should do first is to filter it through what's known as the value proposition. It's a promise of value to be delivered by you, communicated to your customer, and acknowledged by him. At the same time, it's also a belief from the customer about how value will be delivered, experienced, and acquired. Basically, you promise your customers that you will solve their problem, you deliver on that promise, and they will trust you and buy from you in the future. Without a good value proposition, your business will fail. So how do you know if your idea can be turned into a business that offers a good value proposition? Well, you answer the following questions. Does my business focus on what matters most to customers? Does it focus on unsolved pains? Does it target few pains and gains, but it does it well? Does it focus on pains and gains that people will pay a lot of money for? Does it go beyond the functional and targets emotional aspects as well? Does it align with how customers measure success? Does it differentiate from competition? Does it outperform competition substantially on at least one dimension? Is it difficult to copy? If the answer is yes to all of these, then you are onto something. If the answer is yes to most of them, then you should probably rethink and refine some more. If the answer is no to most of them, then it's a stupid idea and you probably shouldn't let your ego convince you otherwise. Speaking of ego, notice how I said that you answer these questions? That makes the assumption that you're objective enough to do that. Let's face it, most of us aren't. We get too attached to our ideas. Remember, your goal is to minimize risk. You do that with information, but if the information is biased, you haven't actually minimized anything. Now, if you genuinely think you can be objective, there's no problem with filtering your ideas by yourself. But ideally, you should do some market research with people that fit your target audience to get unbiased information. I'll get back to this point in a bit, but first I want to tell you about another method to reduce risk. Besides using information, the second best thing that you can do to reduce risk is to reduce the cost. Risk is always relative to costs. Let's say that you have life savings that amount to $100,000. The business that you want to start requires an investment of $100,000 or worse, it requires you to go into debt. In this case, the risk is high. If instead it only costs $10,000, the risk doesn't seem so high. You could afford to give it a try. Maybe you could even afford to give it like 5 or 6 tries with different business ideas. So, does this mean that you should only start a business that is cheap? Of course not. It means that you have to be smart with your money and what you prioritize. Remember, if you can afford it, others can afford it as well. The only thing that differentiates you is what you do with the money. And what you want to do with the money is to spend it in a smarter way than others. In order to do this, you must understand product market fit. Product market fit means being in a good market with a product that can satisfy that market. It's the first step to building a successful venture in which the company meets early adopters, gathers feedback, and gauges interest in its product or products. What this means is that if you're building a new business, it's not necessary to have a finished product to validate your idea. You can validate it by investing just a fraction of what it usually costs. Here's how you do it. First, you create an MVP or an MLP. MVP stands for Minimum Viable Product. It's a product that has just enough features to be deployed to early adopters and gather validated learnings about the product and its continued development. Think of it as a strategy targeted at avoiding building products that the customers do not want. MLP stands for Minimum Lovable Product. Sometimes an MVP is too bare bones and lacks the features that make people love the product. This could generate misleading data about the product's market fit, and ideas that should be pursued are dropped too early. An MLP solves this issue by giving users a product that has the most important features that would make them love it. Let me give you a somewhat related example to illustrate this MVP concept better and show you how much it can help. A few months ago, someone told me about a business venture that he was about to dive in. He was ready to invest all his life savings into that and then some. It involved buying a building, equipment, renovations, and many other costs. Total investment would have been pretty high. On top of that, the liquidity in that area was very low. It's not like he could have invested all this money and then sell it to someone else. Now, I was by no means an expert in that type of business, but I can spot a reckless idea when I see one, especially when it violates common sense. So I asked him the following question. Are you confident enough in this business that you're willing to invest everything in it? Or would you rather keep the money and instead of buying the building you rented, instead of buying the equipment you also rented, you do just enough renovations to make it pretty, and then give the business a try in that formula for a while and see how it goes. If it goes well, you can always buy the building and the equipment later and do full renovations. If it doesn't work out, you still have money left to try at least 9 other businesses instead of wasting everything on a single bet. He agreed and went with the second option, but he was this close to risk everything on a single idea. That's the point of an MVP or MLP, to test business ideas for cheap and pursue them only if they prove to be worthy. You can reduce risk by an order of magnitude by doing it this way. The first money that you invest shouldn't be in long-term stuff like buildings or expensive equipment or some fully featured product. It should be spent developing an MVP or an MLP. Once that is ready, you show it to some people from your target audience and see if your value proposition still stands. This is where the market research part comes into play. Now, when you hear market research, you might imagine that you need to do some focus group with 50 people or some complicated surveys. You could do that, and it would probably help a lot if you can afford it. But we're trying to reduce costs here, so we need to find a more reasonable solution. Luckily, a Google employee found a cheap way to quickly validate a product. I don't remember his name and the specific article that explained this, but I remember very well the idea behind it. What he discovered is that you only need to find 5 people from your target audience and get feedback from them. The reasoning behind this is the following. The first person will give you very useful feedback. The second person will also give you useful feedback, not as much as the first one, but good enough. The third person's feedback will probably overlap with the other ones to a certain extent, but it would still be useful. The fourth person will overlap a lot with the others, but you can still find useful nuggets of information there. The fifth person will overlap almost completely with the others, but there's a small chance that you'll still learn something new. After the fifth person, you get huge diminishing returns, and you probably won't learn something you don't already know. Obviously, for this to work, you have to get people from your target audience. You can't ask 5 random people and expect to get useful feedback, so be picky with who you choose for your research. Also keep in mind that people don't buy products or services, they buy outcomes to a desired state. When researching if an MVP or an MLP is worth developing into a business, also focus on these outcomes of desired state. The keywords here are have, feel, status, and average day. You must gauge how people think and feel by paying attention to the following. What do people have now compared to what they had before using your product? What do people feel now compared to how they felt before using your product? How is their status now compared to their status before using your product? How is their average day now compared to their average day before using your product? If your business doesn't make a significant difference in people's lives, it probably doesn't qualify as a high reward business. It's extremely hard to make people part with their money if they don't see the value in that. Assuming that your market research showed you that your MVP is good enough, there's one final step to validate it. You have to do a soft launch. Basically, you spend some money on advertising and get more people to use it. You then do a small survey and ask your customers one question. Would they deeply regret if the product wasn't available anymore? If at least 40% of them answer yes, you've reached market fit, and then you can really start spending money to develop your business. If less than 40% of them answered yes, be careful not to fall victim to the sunk cost fallacy and pursue an idea that doesn't have market fit. You've already spent money on an MVP and some advertising, and it might be tempting to believe that if you just spend a little more money, everything will be fine. Don't forget that your goal is to reduce risk, not to gamble your savings on stupid business ideas. My point is that you shouldn't get too emotionally attached to your ideas. If they don't have market fit, refine them until they do or discard them. But don't throw money at the problem and hope that fixes it. Now let's say you finally reach market fit and you're ready to let the whole world know about your new business. Stop right there. There is a common trap that many young entrepreneurs fall into. You need to know about points of parity and points of difference. Every successful product or business must have these. Points of difference means that your product must have at least one feature that is different or better than your competitor's product. Most likely, you've already developed that when you designed the MVP and reached market fit. The trap that people fall into is with the points of parity. Points of parity means that your product must have all the features of your competitor's product. Where many people fail is that they develop an MVP with a strong point of difference, they get good feedback on it, and then continue the development without also solving the points of parity. Sooner or later, you have to bring your product to parity, or else the consumers will figure it out and stop using it. For the sake of novelty, they will go easy on you at first if your point of difference is strong, but in time, they will realize that something is missing and they will start complaining or switching back to what's familiar to them. As soon as you reach market fit, and sometimes even before that, you must focus on the points of parity. There are countless examples of businesses that quickly went in the market with all guns blazing because they had a strong point of difference, but they completely neglected the points of parity. This mistake made them crash and burn just as quickly as they became popular. I'm aware that this video might have been all over the place with the information provided, so I'll now do a quick recap of the most important things that I covered. Finding a low-risk, high-reward business is hard or almost impossible. The next best thing that you can do is to try and reduce risk as much as possible. You reduce risk with information that you harvest personally, not with public information. Risk is relative to costs. You can also reduce risk by reducing costs. MVPs and MLPs are essential when researching if a business idea is worth pursuing. You can do market research to test your idea with as few as 5 people. Once your MVP is validated by the market research, you spend some money on advertising to onboard more people and do a quick survey to test its market fit. If 40% of the people would regret if the product wasn't available, you're good to go. Don't forget about the points of parity when developing your business. With a proper value proposition, an MVP, good research and objectivity, you can reduce costs and risks by an order of magnitude, which can help you avoid wasting your life savings on a single stupid idea.